Good evening, and welcome to this evening's session on the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension. My name is Joseph Thornley, and I'm the CEO of 76 Engage, Metrolinx's public engagement partner for virtual consultation. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for this evening's session. And as the moderator, it's my job to try, at least I will try, to keep the event on time, to ensure that your questions are answered completely, and also to make sure that as many questions as possible can be answered during the session. One important note, as you are looking at the screen in front of you, this event is being closed captioned. So to use this player, this feature, enable it on your video player. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations. Metrolinx wishes to recognize the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on these lands and has a responsibility to work with the original keepers of this territory and the many diverse Indigenous peoples living here today. In particular, we acknowledge that the Eglinton Crosstown West project is occurring on the traditional lands of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, as well as the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council. Metrolinx is committed to engaging with Indigenous nations on the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension. So a word about the format. We've scheduled this evening's session to last an hour until about 7:30. We'll start off with a brief presentation, and then we'll run through as many questions as time will permit. The presentation that you'll hear at the top, you can actually see that. It'll be found on the page below the video player. You can also see the questions that have been submitted in advance of the event below the video player. And as you look at those questions, if you see one that reflects your own interests, I'd encourage you to vote for it. As time is limited, we may not be able to answer all questions, so it will give us an indication of those for which there is the greatest interest in having it discussed during the live session if you vote for it. Of course, you can also submit new questions. And if there isn't time to get to all of the questions that have already been submitted or those that are submitted during the live meeting, Metrolinx will be answering the questions after the event. So don't worry, all the information will be provided. Finally, there may be some questions that are submitted that that Metrolinx simply can't answer. So as you can imagine, those questions might include issues specific to an individual person with some privacy considerations, service-related items, or topics of a confidential nature. Again, just before we start, for those who've joined us and would like to take advantage of closed captioning, you can enable that using your video player. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have three Metrolinx people with us tonight who will be answering most of the questions. Joshua Engeljan is program sponsor for the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project. Peter Olak is technical director for the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project. And Carrie Schaefer is senior manager for environmental programs and assessment at Metrolinx. Welcome, Joshua, Peter, and Carrie. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Joe. And really my pleasure to be speaking to you all tonight. My name, again, as Joe said, is Josh Engeljan. I'm going to take you through a short overview of the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension, initial look at some of the work that we're doing. And while I can't see you, I know you're there, and it is definitely my pleasure. And thank you for taking the time to both to listen and to ask us your questions. And really looking forward to just an ongoing dialogue with people in the community and the broader region on this project. So Chris, if you can take us to the next slide. So the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension in its current form was announced by the province in 2019. as part of the subway program with 3 other subway projects. The Eglinton Crosstown West Extension, or as we call it, the ECWE, it's an extension of the Crosstown LRT that's currently under construction. So it extends it west from Mount Dennis, just over 9 kilometers, all the way along Eglinton into Mississauga, connecting into Renforth Station, which is served by TTC buses, Mississauga Myway buses, as well as GO buses. As well as there's a lot of planning happening on a further extension from Renforth all the way to Pearson Airport. So overall, on the line to Renforth, there are 7 stations. 4 of those are underground at Royal York, Islington, Kipling, and Martin Grove. There are 2 elevated stations at Scarlett and Jane. And actually that leads me into, just in terms of describing the alignment, as it connects going from east to west from Mount Dennis, there's a short underground section of about 600 meters. Then the line goes elevated across the Humber River Valley for about 1.5 kilometers, and then another 6.5 kilometers of tunneling from Scarlett all the way into Renforth and Mississauga. Our work says that we anticipate there'll be about 37,000 people using this line on a daily basis, so definitely a very well used line. And with future extension all the way to Pearson Airport, this will be a seamless rapid transit line of about 33 kilometers that connects all the way from Pearson Airport through Mississauga, through Etobicoke, all the way through the central section of Toronto on Eglinton into Scarborough at Kennedy Station. So really an important piece of infrastructure for the region overall in the city. So Chris, you can take us to the next slide. And one thing that I didn't mention was that, you know, these are big projects. They do take a while to construct. So our planned opening date for the line is 2031. This gives you a sense of some of the timing. So we've already passed a number of our milestones. Excited to announce that work on the tunneling, so the tunnel contract, which is the tunneled section from Renforth through to just before Scarlett Road. We are just working with the final contractors to award that contract, and we expect work to begin at the launch shaft. So that's the place where we insert the large tunnel boring machines into the ground, which is at Renforth. So right at Renforth and Eglinton. We expect that work, and if you go out there probably in the just the beginning of the summer, late spring, you'll start to see more and more activity there as work begins on the tunnel launch shaft. Working towards completion of that tunnel in 2025. And then the next piece of work, which is on building the stations, fitting out, adding the tracks and all the systems and everything to make this a functioning rapid transit line, really getting started in earnest in 2025 to that 2031, 2030 opening date. Next slide, please. And I talked a little bit about this in terms of what's new. If you are in the area, you will see that we are doing a number of investigative studies. So we're drilling boreholes and doing other studies to make sure that we have really good information to support the planning and design work we're doing. And again, we're very excited to be able to say that we have announced West End connectors led by Acon, Dragados, and Gela as the first proponent that we'll be working with on the tunnels contract. So exciting news, and definitely looking towards shovels in the ground and the project moving forward. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to take you quickly through an overview of the entire line going from west to east. One thing I'll say, and you can see from these diagrams, that we are in the early planning stages. So the planning and design is underway. We're working closely with City of Toronto, TTC, City of Mississauga, My Way, Greater Toronto Airport Authority, and other partners. You know, we've had meetings already with folks like the Mount Dennis Community Association to get input as we advance these plans and designs. So it's a good time to get involved. It's a good time to provide your feedback because many decisions on the project are still to be made in terms of specific designs. So that's part of the reason why what you'll see won't look like a fully baked transit station, because we're just, again, in those earlier stages. So in terms of this slide, this is at Renforth and Eglinton. This is where the launch shaft is for the tunnel boring machine, as well as the station that will connect very nicely to the My Way buses, the TTC buses, and the GO buses to be able to connect into either to or from broader locations in Mississauga, Brampton, and beyond. Next slide. So moving farther east, this is the proposed location at Martin Grove in Eglinton. And this is a good point for me to identify that in many cases, wherever possible, we are planning to put what we call a station box. So that is where the station construction and digging out for underground stations actually happens. We're planning to put that outside of the road. So a little bit different from Eglinton Crosstown, where in pretty much all the cases, the station construction is right under the road, because there really is not the space with buildings, you know, right abutting the road to put that station box outside of the road. So wherever possible, we're planning to put the station box outside of the road. And what that means is that we can really reduce the amount of construction impacts to traffic, to utilities, and other things associated with this construction. So the blue line represents the tunnel, and again, that white rectangle represents where we'll be building the station box. So this is Martin Grove. If you can take us to the next one. So at Kipling and Eglinton, this is the one location where of the underground stations where the station box will be under the road. This is because of the adjacent townhomes and development, so we don't want to impact those through the tunnel construction. So we keep the station box there right under the road, just west of Kipling. So we can keep going. This is at Islington and Eglinton, where we're planning to put that again, that station box on the northwest corner. And in each of these cases, you know, we're going to be doing work to make sure that the stations are well connected to the surrounding development and are also well connected to the north-south bus service. So there are important TTC bus routes that are on all of these north-south streets, and we want to make sure that there's a really good connection between the buses and the rapid transit stations so that it's easy for riders to go in between both of those services. So this is Islington, and Chris, you can take us to the next one at Royal York. Again, on the northwest corner outside of the roadway. And as the tunnel continues to the east and we move towards Scarlet, so you can take us to the next slide. This is where the trains will be coming out from a tunnel and moving into an elevated guideway. So in this diagram, the pink is referring to an elevated guideway. The shaded box refers to a portal, which is basically, you know, is the location where those trains will be coming out from, making the transition from tunnel to elevated. And at Scarlet and Eglinton, we are planning for an elevated station that straddles the road. And the reason why we go from underground to elevated and then elevated through the Humber River Valley is really because of the floodplains, the sensitive natural area, and we would have to go incredibly deep here to avoid the Humber River, which would create a lot of other challenges. So that's why we moved to an elevated guideway. I think we'll get into more detail on that later. So Chris, you can take us to the next slide. So the elevated alignment will be just north of the road. with an elevated station at Jane connecting to the bus service there and the future rapid TO bus service that TTC and City of Toronto are working on. And then again, the elevated guideway will go underground and connect, go underground for the last 600 meters or so through the Mount Dennis community and connect with the Eglinton Crosstown LRT that's currently under construction. And one final point I'll make is that we are planning for this to be a seamless integrated service. So there's going to be no forced transfer between, these is not two separate lines. This will be one integrated rapid transit line. So whether you're getting on at Jane or whether you're getting on at Fairlawn, at Dufferin, you'll be able to go in either direction without having to get off the train. So just moving quickly, because I know we want to get to our questions, that the tunneling work that I spoke to will be done by, it will be a twin tunnel, so two tunnels similar to the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. The tunnels are constructed using what we call TBMs, or tunnel boring machines, that can tunnel approximately 10 meters per day, and you know they're very large machines, and that you know we insert at Renforth and then extract at Scarlet Road. And look forward to future discussions and creating opportunities for folks in the community to see them and to see the construction that happens using those machines. And so Chris, you can take us to the next slide. And so this is my closing slide, just a little bit more information. If people would like to get in touch with us by email, by phone, there is a community office that you can reach us at, or through our website, or all sorts of other social media that's identified there. So that's it for me, Joe, in terms of the presentation. As you can see, everyone, that we are happy to describe this. We're still at the early stages of planning and design, and we're really looking forward through the course of this year to coming back to you with a lot more detail, so we can get your feedback on the where the station buildings are, what they look like, all those kinds of things.
Well, thank you for that, Josh. Obviously, there is a lot of work on a lot of locations, and there's a fair number of questions. So we'll try and get through as many as we can. For those people who have joined us, we're now going to do questions and answers based on the questions that are there on the website. So if you see a question that you really want us to answer during the live session, please just upvote that. And just a note before we start, I talked about closed captioning on YouTube. And as we all know, sometimes things just don't work the way that you want them to. And it would appear that our YouTube closed captioning is not working. And we apologize for that. We were actually trying to put in a link on the Slido to the to a live transcript, but that did not really work. So we will make sure in the Q&A to add a question, how can I get a transcript, and then add that after the event for anybody who's not able to follow along. And again, we apologize. Technology, sometimes it just doesn't cooperate. So we have now just about 40 minutes for the questions. And as we talked about, Josh, in your presentation, you covered a lot of ground. You talked about more details. And indeed, the very first question is about details. When will you present site plans and elevation drawings of the above ground section of the Crosstown, so that the public can look at those details on the above ground section?
So I'm going to pass this one to Peter.
Thank you very much for the question. So as Josh mentioned a moment ago, we are still in a very early preliminary engineering type scoping design level of detail. So right now we don't have that information. We suspect probably later in the year we'll have something to come back with to consult with the local community.
Okay. Let's talk a bit more about the above ground part. Looking west of the Mount Dennis station, the question is whether it's possible for that part of the line to remain underground below Jane Street, west of Mount Dennis, so as to preserve parks, mature trees, and being quieter and less visually disruptive.
So
Go ahead, Peter.
I take that. Okay. So west of Mount Dennis. If you like, the alignment is broken down into three distinct sections. The underground section from Ranford to Scarlet, and then the elevated guideway section from Scarlet to just east of Jane, and then obviously the connection from Jane to Mount Dennis. So I'll talk about the connection to Mount Dennis, which I think is the substantive part of your question. You will be happy to note that we are proposing to deliver that section using a tunnel option as opposed to a cut and cover option, which is more disruptive. And the reason we've done that is we recognize that the local community has been impacted with construction for the last number of years. For example, as we were delivering and still continue to deliver the Crosstown LRT. So we believe the best solution for the Jane to Mount Dennis section will be using a tunnel option. We're still obviously determining what tunneling option to use for that. And obviously, we're still looking at the launch shaft, which for tunneling option, you need somewhere to get into the tunnel and to extract the tunnel boring machine. So we are still trying to determine the property size and the location for the launch shaft and the extraction shafts. But our matching goal here is to ensure that we limit the impact of that property from Eglinton right away.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a bit about noise mitigation. One of the questions would like you to provide, if you could please, some information about the strategies for noise mitigation, particularly on the elevated section along Eglinton Flats. And I wonder if it wouldn't be too much if you could talk about noise mitigation, both in terms of the construction period and then, how the plans will mitigate noise during actual operations.
Carrie, you're our noise expert, so I'll pass this one to you.
Great, thanks very much, Josh, and thanks for the great question. Yes, I can speak a little bit to that. So in terms of noise and vibration, this is of, a highest priority for us at Metrolinx as we look at environmental impacts and how we might mitigate those. In terms of the elevated section, as a part of the 2020 environmental assessment, or the addendum to the EPR as we call it, we did look at noise and vibration impacts and did a thorough assessment based on the preliminary design there. What we found to date is that we aren't anticipating significant impacts to noise and vibration. And we looked at what we call sensitive receptors, so places where people live and reside. We looked at those sensitive receptors and we modeled the noise and vibration to those locations. As I said, we're not anticipating significant impacts at the moment. However, as you heard from Peter just now, the designs in this area are still in the preliminary stages. So what we anticipate doing is updating those assessments as we continue to refine designs and more information becomes available. Should we find that there is some increases to noise and vibration that would warrant mitigation, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox that are tried and tested on other projects that we've implemented. So things like noise walls, both reflective and absorptive noise walls, have been proven to be very effective at reducing noise. resilient fasteners on the tracks have been shown to be very effective in reducing vibration, as well as floating slabs on certain sections of the track. So these are all things that we'll be looking at as we continue to refine our design in the area. And we'll absolutely be back to the community to share the results as we continue to model and assess. So that's on the operation side. So I did skip ahead because I think that was primarily the question. But what I can say on the construction side as well is we take issues of noise and vibration very, very seriously. Included in all of our contracts are provisions for our constructors to develop noise and vibration management plans before they're able to start any sort of construction. So what you'll see there is in these plans that will be submitted to Metrolinx and also shared with the communities is how we might manage the noise in construction during construction. So we would have our constructors assess the noise and vibration levels based on the means and methods that they've chosen for the construction activity, where we would require mitigation, we would require our constructors to clearly identify that. And so we will have very detailed plans before any sort of construction starts on that front. And in order to ensure that we're living up to the commitments that we've made, we also have monitoring, ongoing real-time monitoring for noise and vibration during the full duration of our construction project. So that will allow us, that will kind of keep us honest and make sure that we are meeting the objectives that we said we would. So a lot, just to reiterate, this is, noise and vibration is, at the forefront of everything we do. We realize that construction has impacts to the community, and to the greatest extent possible, we will be mitigating for that.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for proactively addressing the issue of getting back to the community, keeping the community informed, because I know that for people who are here tonight, transparency and openness is on things that will impact them is very important. So thanks for adding that. Let's talk about another impact. I know that vegetation, trees, is a recurring theme for all of your works. And one of the questioners has asked whether it's necessary to remove all the trees along the section of Eglinton Flats between Jane and Scarlet. Can this section, I assume that means the right of way, be closer to Eglinton to avoid the need to remove extensively the trees?
Carrie, I think you were on a roll, so why don't you talk about our approach
it's
to...
me again. Yes, of course, and another great question, thank you. So in terms of trees and vegetation, it's similarly important to everything we do, and number one is always avoidance in this regard. So we are doing everything we can to protect and retain trees to the greatest extent possible for this project. Again, as you heard earlier, we're still in the preliminary stages of design in this particular area in the elevated section. So we don't know the full extent in which we would need to remove trees or potentially remove trees. We will be avoiding that to the greatest extent possible. So what we'll be doing this spring is going out and taking detailed inventory of all the trees in the area along the proposed elevated section of the alignment. And we'll be working very closely, my team will be working very closely with Peter's team to see how we might put forward a design that avoids, to the greatest extent possible, trees. And I think that first and foremost, as I said, avoidance, but the reality is that there will be some trees that will need to be removed. And that's just, that is just the fact of major infrastructure projects. So where we can't avoid them and where we do need to remove trees, we have a very robust vegetation compensation guideline that Metrolinx will adhere to that will dictate how we compensate for these trees. So our goal is no net loss in terms of tree canopy. And that's what we'll be striving for and endeavoring to meet. One particular thing of note, very positive news, is that we are working with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority and looking to partner with them on how we might do some advanced plantings in anticipation of some of these removals, so that we are ensuring that we are achieving that no net loss goal. So we'll be, nothing finalized yet, but we are working very closely to see where there are local opportunities within this study area to enhance the tree canopy and do some local plantings as early as possible here. So again, stay tuned for more information on that. We intend to circle back as soon as we have updates on those in that regard.
And Peter, is there anything else you wanted to add on the alignment work in what we're considering as that work proceeds?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, in terms of placement of the alignment, we are looking at all the options, and what we want to try and do is to ensure that the alignment is placed to limit, as Kerry has mentioned, the number of trees being impacted by the location of the alignment. Obviously, the further you push into the parks, the more trees you impact. And the other option we looked at was actually avoiding putting the alignment all together and having on the park side and having the alignment over Eglinton Avenue. But how that obviously comes up with a lot of impacts, such as you need to widen the road, you may need utility relocations, and ultimately for the Humber Valley crossing, you may need to rebuild a new bridge as well, and that has significant impact. So we'll try and locate the alignment at least as close to the Eglinton right of way as possible, while understanding that we need to minimize the amount of trees to be impacted from that.
Thank you very much for those answers. So let's talk about something that I don't think, Josh, you spent a lot of time about, but clearly is in everybody's mind, and that is the potential link to Pearson. So there's a question: what's the progress on the airport extension? Will the line head to the airport terminals or the Pearson Transit Hub?
Thanks, Joe. So very good question. So just to clarify, I mean, I think as people are aware, the government's commitment has been to, in terms of funding, has been to build the line to Renforth and Mississauga, but we are actively working on the planning of that airport segment from Renforth to Pearson, working closely with Greater Toronto Airports Authority in terms of looking at doing business casing, and later in the year we hope to be out with more details in terms of costs and benefits and ridership for the different options of how we could connect from Renforth to Pearson. So that work is very much underway. We're very excited about the airport segment, and we do see it as an important part of the overall line. So the planning work is proceeding there. In terms of the actual airport hub, I know Greater Toronto Airport Authority is working also hard on what the best options are for a transit hub within the realm of the airport. And obviously this is an interesting time for the airport and all of us in transit. So but we know that we're going to come out of this, and where these are longer term projects. So we think through all of those things as we do this work.
Thank you very much for that. Here's a question that's received several votes during the course of this live meeting, so that we know that there are people who are on right now who are quite interested in it. And the question is, why isn't the proposed Jane North LRT station developed on the northwest corner rather than the more heavily treed wetland habitat corner of Fergie Brown Park?
So I can take this one, and then Peter, if you have any more details to add, please jump in. So the first thing I would say, and in the diagrams that we showed, certainly for the elevated guideway and the elevated stations, I would say that what we just showed was indicative. It's still very much work in progress. So it's really good to get the feedback. so as we come forward with more details on those plans, it'll be interesting to see if people still have the comment. I would say one thing though is, especially for the elevated stations, wherever possible, we'd like the stations themselves to straddle the north-south streets, so Scarlet and Jane, so that we can provide good connections on either side of the street. And in particular at Jane, where that is a very heavily used bus already, one of the busiest in the city of Toronto, and where City of Toronto and TTC are working on some short-term bus improvements, like a bus rapid transit light called Rapid TO. So there will be further bus improvements. We want to make sure we have good connections between the rapid transit line and the bus route. So straddling the station, straddling the street, with an ability for passengers to get in and out at either side of the street, then allows people to make easy connections between the bus and the rapid transit, and avoids, wherever possible, them having to cross the street to do that.
Okay.
So those are some of the key considerations. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. A question about the bridge over the Humber River. And this question is, wouldn't a new stacked bridge over the Humber River be more cost effective than building and maintaining a raised line between Jane and Scarlet Road to save trees?
Peter, I'm going to pass that one to you.
So can you repeat that question again?
Okay, and I must I may not have asked it correctly because I'm not that familiar with this particular stretch. But wouldn't a new stacked bridge over the Humber River be more cost effective than building and maintaining a raised line between Jane and Scarlet Road?
So I'm assuming that the stacked bridge will be a replacement of the existing crossing over the Humber River, and therefore that also assumes that the alignment is going to be probably over top the existing Eglinton right-of-way. Now, assuming that all of that is true, then the impacts that I have mentioned in terms of the traffic impacts, utility impacts, and potential widening of Eglinton right-of-way, all of those impacts will come into play. Now, given all of that, and from a cost-benefit perspective, I do not believe that you will find that the alignment over top the Eglinton right-of-way and building a new stacked bridge over the Humber Valley is going to be cost-effective compared to the elevated guideway. There is another argument, obviously, to be made related to the impacts to trees that I take, but I think everything else considered, I think the solution that we are proposing here is cost-effective in terms of maintaining overall reliable journey time, end-to-end journey time from right up to Brantford.
And Peter, why don't you just add what we're doing to make sure that that bridge across the Humber has minimizes the environmental impacts to the Humber and to the surrounding area?
Yeah, so I mean, a number of things that we've looked at, and I think the biggest comment we've got from the City of Toronto and TTC is related to the bridge aesthetics and how you can, the opportunities you have for making the bridge maintain the local environment or protect the local environment. And all of those are what we are considering. We are hearing loud and clear that aesthetics is very important, and impacts to the trees and the local vegetation is also very important. So I think we just have to look west to our neighbors in Calgary and Vancouver, who have implemented similar transit infrastructure over a similar environment, and just learn from their experience and improve on what they've implemented.
I think another important point, and sorry, Joe, is that it's going to also be a free span bridge. So we won't have any piers right in the Humber River as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just want to just drop in a comment here again about the live stream closed caption. We have fixed the problem. So if you do want the live stream closed caption, at the top of the Q&A, there's a blue box. It includes the link. And if you go there, you'll be able to see a live stream closed caption, the live stream captioning coming up. We apologize for not having gotten that going, but I assure you, someone was working really hard in the background to make the interwebs work the way that we hoped they would at the beginning. So let's stay on environment for a second. We have a question. What were the findings of the environmental study between Jane and Scarlett to mitigate the impact on the wildlife that is dependent on this treed area?
Carrie?
Thank you. And another great question. Thanks so much. Oh, I'm having a little bit of feedback. Not sure, somebody might need to mute. There we go. There we go. Okay, great. So the question was about wildlife. So, first, Metrolinx is really committed to reducing impacts to wildlife to the greatest extent possible. The question was with respect to the environmental assessment. So as a part of the EPR addendum that was completed last summer, we looked at potential impacts to the natural heritage. So we did reviews of desktop information as well as field surveys, and those were completed back in, some of them back in the fall of 2019 and into 2020 for aquatic and terrestrial vegetation and wildlife. And we also studied the Eglinton flats and classified the land through ecological land classifications and noted where there was potential for wildlife habitat. So to complement this work, we are undertaking, to complement the work that was done this past year in the EPR addendum, we are going to be going out this spring to do additional field studies along the proposed elevated segment. So this would include surveys for amphibians, turtles, breeding birds, bats, wetlands, as well as aquatic habitat assessments. So those are all forthcoming, and those will better inform any potential impacts to wildlife. So again, as design continues to be refined and updated, we will have a better sense of the potential impacts and how we might mitigate those impacts. Some of the commitments that I'm sure you'll be familiar with is, with respect to things like tree removal. If and where we identify that we might have to remove trees, we are committed to doing that outside of the bird breeding window to avoid impacts there. Where we believe we are close to wildlife habitat and construction zones, will make clear delineations and distinctions between construction zones, so wildlife cannot enter and pose a danger. And in terms of also the other piece that I do want to highlight, and it kind of builds on what Josh and Peter were just talking about, is that we are proposing a clear span, a bridge that clearly spans the Humber, so no piers in the watercourse, which will greatly mitigate impacts to fish and fish habitat. So that is obviously, of course, one of the goals, and we've confirmed that we'll be able to achieve that. So that's good news. At the end of the construction project, we'll of course be restoring and renaturalizing the area to the greatest extent possible. As I mentioned earlier in the at the beginning of the meeting, we're also going to be following our vegetation compensation guideline very closely. So where we have removals that might have might be more have higher ecological functioning, we will be looking at even higher compensation ratios in terms of trees and vegetation. So we, as I mentioned, we're not looking to have any net loss here in terms of habitat or trees and vegetation. So that's something we'll continue to update you on as we continue to refine the designs in this area. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now for something completely different. I don't think we've talked a lot about costs so far tonight, and there's a question from a person who is asking, how come the line isn't elevated all the way to Renforth? You'd save money on tunneling while still providing excellent grade separated service.
I'm happy to answer that one, Joe. And it's a really good question. Obviously, over the years, there have been a lot of different plans for the Eglinton West extension from surface to elevated to underground. Metrolinx released a business case last year, early in 2020, that looked at a number of options, surface, underground, 14 stations, 3 stations, 7 stations, and we think that the current option with partly underground, partly elevated, provides the best balance of travel time saving. So you're separated from traffic, you're fast, you're reliable, and all the benefits that come with that. Obviously, in some cases, elevated can be more cost effective, but it also comes with a lot of different impacts depending on the surrounding areas and to adjacent development and things like that. So we've tried to hit the right balance between underground and elevated to provide a fast and reliable service that will connect to the longer rapid transit line and provide really good service to the local community and also to all the people that are connecting on and off of the connecting north-south buses and other transit.
Thank you for that, Josh. Now, here's a question from someone who's looking ahead to operation. And this person is asking about the vehicles. When will the additional light rail vehicles for this project be ordered? And will they be the same models used on phase 1 of the Crosstown?
So I'm happy to take that one. That's another really good question. I think so. One, those all the specific details of those decisions, those are still something that's very much being worked on. So we don't have all the answers. I mean, the one thing I would say is whatever vehicles we're using, certainly to begin with, we'd anticipate that it's going to be the same vehicles that have already been ordered for the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, which are the Flex City vehicles, because they'll be running from end to end and in the right service patterns, and they'll all be stored in the maintenance and storage facility at Black Creek in Eglinton. So really decisions about changes to fleet and future fleet need to be made for the best strategy for the entire line. And we would obviously do that in close partnership with the TTC who are operating the line.
Okay, thank you. Of course, you've talked about elevated sections, and that will become a new neighbor to people who live in the community and travel through there. And one of our questioners has asked, will the elevated sections be lit up underneath to ensure pedestrian safety? Proper lighting is key to reducing crime and making vulnerable people feel safe.
So I'll take part of this, and then Peter, I'll pass it over to you if I've missed anything. So really, that's a really important point. And I mean, we fully recognize that, approximately 1.5 kilometers, this is, a big piece of infrastructure that we will be putting in through this whole area, Humber River Valley, Black Creek, Eglinton Flats and Fergie Brown Park. So the treatment underneath and around the elevated guideway will be key. We've already heard from our engagement with folks at Mount Dennis Community Association that they don't want to see things like gravel. I think they're maybe thinking about the situation underneath the gardener, and we think that we can certainly make it a lot more natural than that. And specifically, I think a lot of that design work is yet to proceed. So that is important feedback. Peter, I don't know if there's anything else you would add to that.
No, one little bit I can add is that once the design moves on a little bit more than we are right now, and as part of the engagement that we'll have with the local community, there will be opportunities to tailor the output, the look and feel and the output to what the community wants. So there's opportunity to talk to the community and tailor the output to what they want it to look like.
And sorry, I remembered what I meant to say as you were talking, Peter, but I mean, safety is a top priority for us in Metrolinx, and we're always going to design with safety in mind. And B, we do have the recent experience of the work on Eglinton Crosstown with the elevated guideway just east of Mount Dennis, and we've already had lesson learned sessions with the City of Toronto, thinking about what kind of improvements we can make this time around. So that's all of these things are very much top of mind to us. So thanks again for that question.
Okay, and I think between you may well have preempted the next question that was teed up, the related question that was asking, what will the elevated section look like, and will there be an attempt to make it as visually unobtrusive as possible? And if I heard you correctly, there will be further consultation. People will have the opportunity to be involved and see the evolution of the design.
That's right, Joe. That's right, for sure. Another point that I'll mention in terms of the look and feel of the community, I think something also to think about is the experience of the actual passengers. And I've gone through that area many times, both walking and driving, and I think being elevated through that area, you're going to have really beautiful views to the north and south. So thinking about that experience as well is also important.
Well, let me pick up where you said elevated, because of course, in the GTA, a lot of us live in high buildings. So in terms of the condos and apartments at Eglinton and Scarlett, how are you going to implement effective noise protection for the people who are living in those buildings to ensure that it's not disruptive to them?
Carrie?
Thanks. So yes, a great question. And we might need to mute. There we go. And I think I touched a little bit on this already at the beginning of the meeting today. So maybe I'll elaborate a little bit more on how we do our noise and vibration impact assessments. So as I mentioned, we have taken a preliminary look through our EPR addendum, our EA addendum this past year, at projected noise impacts to not just the ground level, but also the higher levels of the high rises at Scarlett and Eglinton. We specifically chose those as sensitive receptors because we know that they are in close proximity to the proposed alignment. So the assessment, basically how we do that is we take monitored, we take monitors and we go out and we establish what our baseline conditions are for noise and vibration, and we use that to calibrate a model. And that we then run our noise and vibration impact assessment based on that model and what projected noise or vibration increases we might potentially be encountering. If we're finding a significant increase, we will be proposing mitigation to bring those noise and vibration levels back down as close as possible to our current situation. So we've run that model and that assessment for this area based on a preliminary level of design that you've heard from Peter and Josh about. Currently, we're not really looking at increases in noise and vibration that are significant or very noticeable. As I think I mentioned earlier, we're going to be rerunning and updating those models as the design progresses to make sure we validate and stay up to date on the most recent design details. So again, we will be back to share that with you once the design progresses to a state where we can update those models. And rest assured that should we need to mitigate for noise and vibration in this area, we have a lot of tools that have been successful on our other projects and shown to be effective. So things like noise walls are very effective, especially for noise that comes from the rail wheel interaction that we would be dealing with in terms of the Eglinton LRT vehicles. So at the moment, we are still finalizing the need for any sort of mitigation, and we will be back to the public once we have updated designs to share the updated findings.
Okay, thank you for that, Carrie. So you've been working really hard, all three of you, and answering these questions pretty completely, I think, but fairly rapidly. And I think that we have time for maybe two more questions before we're done. So stay with us for a bit more time. And so for our penultimate question, this is very particular to anticipated traffic flow and access to Emmett from Eglinton. And during and after construction, what's the anticipated traffic flow there, and for how long? And I'm assuming that is meaning construction traffic and disruption.
So Joe, we're still working on things like specific timing for traffic impact studies and traffic mitigation. The one thing that I can say right now is that we will ensure both for Emmett Avenue and for Fergie Brown Park that there will always be access. So there will likely be impacts to the existing roadways when we're building the elevated guideway, but we will make sure that both through temporary and permanent provisions that there'll always be access. So it won't be closed off, and people, either residents or people accessing many of the healthcare facilities along Emmett Avenue, will have that access. As for specifics, we will have to come back for more detail, but we have definitely heard loud and clear. Both people have identified that there could be impacts and have identified that as an issue. And we're making sure in our work with the transportation department and the parks and planning departments at City of Toronto that we're appropriately planning for any temporary and permanent provision so that access can be maintained.
Okay, thank you for that. Final question. Kipling and Eglinton, there are townhomes there that are less than 10 meters from Eglinton. Can the tunnel be nearer the south side of Eglinton, which would place it under the road and bicycle path?
I'll pass that one to you, Peter. Oh, you're on mute. We almost got through the entire one without saying you're on mute.
I had to spoil it, right? So in terms of noise impacts from the tunnel emanating to residential condos, I think from a noise level or vibration level, I think you will not be able to experience the level of noise emanating from the tunnel onto the condominium buildings. So I think regardless of where the tunnel is located, I think the noise levels being felt by residents in the condominiums will be fairly minimal, and regardless of where the tunnel is.
Okay, thank you. So just before we wrap up the session, Josh, is there anything you'd like to say by way of summary at the end of this in terms of the questions, the perceptions you've taken away, and what people should be expecting in the future?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Joe. I mean, I think it's been great Again, we can't see you, but I know there's something like 60 or more people on, and really appreciate everyone's time and the dialogue through the virtual means. Obviously, a lot of questions on the elevated guideway impacts to the parkland and Mount Dennis. So we'll take all of those comments, but certainly heard a lot of emphasis on those questions. The thing I would say overall is really that we're myself, Josh, Peter, Carrie. There's Kelly Thornton, our manager of community relations, Chris Phillips, the project director. Like we're here. We're going to be here for a while. There's a lot of work to do on this project, and we're just really looking forward to getting your feedback and doing this together. I think, as Peter already said, we heard strong feedback about concerns around cut and cover as a construction methodology through that 600-meter stretch in the Mount Dennis community, and we considered that, and we're not planning to do cut and cover in that section, even though that may have been something that was communicated in the past. So we are listening to your input, and we're keen to continue to work together over the years as the tunnel and the rest of the project in an exciting way come into play, and it'll be an important part of the community for decades and beyond. So this is really just the start of that conversation.
Well, we've reached the end of our time, and Peter, Carrie, Josh, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone who has participated here tonight for the way that you've answered the questions, the detail and the jargon-free way that you've approached these topics. And for everyone who is participating, and especially for those people who added a question that we weren't able to get to. If we didn't have time to get to your question, we will be providing written answers right there on this page. The page will not go away. The video of tonight's session will be there so that you'll be able to rewind it if you want. And also, if you want to know about future events, there's a place right there on the page where you can register to be notified about future developments. So, in closing, I want to thank you again for your interest in joining us here this evening and participating in this discussion. This is what we get to do as citizens, and it is important. And thank you for being here. Good night, and stay home safely.